the Living with Wildlife Illinois team is hosting a question and answer session about white nose syndrome, a disease that's been impacting bats in Illinois and elsewhere. I'm Laura Kamen.
And I'm Kathy Andrews Wright. Today, our guest is Joe Kath. He's with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Division of Natural Heritage. Joe, can you give us a little bit more background on yourself, please?
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Joe Kath. I am the Endangered Species Program Manager with the Division of Natural Heritage. I've been with the Division of Natural Heritage now for about 26, 27 years. Time certainly does fly. My daily activities revolve around management, recovery, conservation issues for all of Illinois' endangered and threatened species. And as a side note too, I do have a specialty or a research specialty in bats, conducted a lot of my graduate research on bats. So I also serve as the department's liaison for bat research, bat conservation issues as well.
Excellent. So let's get started with the basics. What is white nose syndrome and how does it affect bats?
Sure. Whitenose syndrome is an emerging disease in North American bats, and it's resulted in a dramatic decline in the bat population across both the United States and Canada, literally killing millions of bats. The disease is caused by a fungus, and the scientific name of that fungus is Pseudomonas destructans. Now, don't ask me to spell that right now, but and that fungus colonizes the bat's skin. And the actual condition itself, white nose syndrome, it's named for a distinctive white fungal growth that occurs around the muzzles of bats and also on the wings. And these are seen in bats that are hibernating. The fungus prefers to grow in a temperature range really between, say, 39 and 59 degrees Fahrenheit. And research has shown that it can't survive in temperatures above 68, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, it's been deemed a psychrophilic fungus, which means it is a cold-loving fungus. Because it is a cold-loving fungus, many species of bats can fight off the infection or the fungal infection during the spring and the summer months when the bats are active, when temperatures are elevated. But when the bats go into hibernation, their resistance to the disease, to the fungus, falls really near zero. They become totally susceptible to the fungus and the disease. When bats go into hibernation, they reduce their metabolism, and this is known as going into a state of torpor. So when bats go into hibernation, reduce their metabolism, go into this state of torpor, that is when the white nose syndrome fungus starts to really attack the bats and start to, again, massively affect the health of those animals.
Well, thank you for that overview, Joe. You
Yes.
mentioned that white nose syndrome is in the United States and Canada, but it's not a natural fungal disease here. It's only recently been discovered in North America. Can you give us some background on where it originated from and how it got here?
Sure. And it's very interesting because it is a newly emerging disease, newly emerging pathogen, wildlife disease. White nose syndrome was first discovered in February of 2006 in upstate New York. And it was actually a photo was taken by someone exploring a cave in upstate New York that showed many bats with this white fungal growth. Take that a few steps further, it was analyzed and it was determined to be this new disease. Since that time, it has spread massively across both North America and Canada. The interesting thing is that the species, the fungal species that causes white nose syndrome, is found throughout both Europe and Asia. However, there's no mass mortality of bats in these countries, that even bats that are infected with white nose syndrome. So essentially, the fungus originated from Europe and Asia, and made its way to North America, most likely by human activities. And simply because there is no natural migration pattern of bats flying across the ocean from Europe and Asia to North America, the only logical likely transmission source was humans inadvertently brought the fungus from Europe and Asia to North America. The fungal spores, or the fungus that causes white nose syndrome, the spores of that fungus are microscopic. They cannot be seen with the naked eye. These spores can persist on clothing, on boots, on shoes, even on equipment that many cavers use, flashlights, helmets, things like that. And what it likely happened, and it is a theory that's commonly accepted throughout the scientific community, is either a person or group of persons with fungal spores on their clothing or, say, caving equipment came to North America. They had no idea that these spores were on their clothing. They visited several caves in New York, and or the single cave where white nose was discovered. The spores fell off their clothing, fell off their caving equipment into that cave. Once those spores were in that cave, the fungus developed. It infected the bats in that cave, and basically that's how white nose started. So nothing was done on purpose. Humans just had no idea even about this fungus. That it was caused by these microscopic spores. But that's why it's very important now that we ask people to wash their clothes, clean their clothes, follow a very strict decontamination protocol, especially with researchers. If you're going from one cave to another cave, say within the same day, conducting research, again, there's a very strict protocol, certain sorts of chemicals that should be used that will actually kill the spores, and allow you to safely move from one cave to another. And I think it's really important to just discuss some of the spread of white nose syndrome across North America and into Canada. Now remember, in 2006, it was discovered in upstate New York. So since 2006 to present day, white nose has now been identified in 35 states and 7 Canadian provinces, which is just a massive spread of that disease, basically from the East Coast to the West Coast. And it's spread as far as Washington State and California. So it's confirmed in 35 states, 7 provinces. We have also recently found the fungus, no, not any infected bats yet, but the fungus in 4 additional states: California, Mississippi, Montana, and Wyoming. So we're just facing a massive continued disease spread across North America, and again up into Canada, with 7 Canadian provinces being affected. If we take it to just an Illinois focus, in Illinois, 14 counties are positive for white nose syndrome infection. And that has remained relatively stable since white nose was first detected in Illinois in 2013.
White nose syndrome has been in the United States for less than 2 decades, but it has severely impacted bat populations. Joe, how many bats do scientists estimate have died from white-nose syndrome? And are there any species that have been particularly hard hit or that have seemed to fare better than others?
Sure. As of 2021, it's been estimated that approximately 6.7, almost 7 million bats have died because of white-nose syndrome across North America. And at many sites where bats hibernate, we continue to see 90 to 100% mortality at many hibernation sites strictly due to white-nose syndrome. So the figures are staggering. As white-nose syndrome targets bats that hibernate, more than half of the 47 bat species that are endemic to both the United States and Canada, it's important to remember that more than half of those species rely on hibernation as part of their normal life cycle. White-nose syndrome targets bats that are specifically hibernating. So right now, current data is showing that 12 bat species, including 2 that are federally endangered, 1 that's federally threatened, have been confirmed as having or harboring white-nose syndrome in North America. So we have 12 species that we know are really being hit the hardest. In addition to those 12, there are an additional 8 species where the fungus has been found on them, but the bats have yet to show any external signs of disease. So, we're approaching 20 species of bats that in one form or another are being hit very hard by white-nose syndrome. If we break that down even further, of the 12 species we know that are suffering mortality from white-nose, it's important to remember that 7 of those 12 are native to the state of Illinois. That's greater than half of those species are native to Illinois. The 3 main species that are being hit the hardest by white-nose are the northern long-eared bat, the little brown bat, and the tricolored bat. And all 3 of those species are native to, endemic to Illinois, and they all hibernate in Illinois. So many Midwestern bat species are on the list of the 12 most hardest, 12 species hit the hardest from white-nose syndrome.
Wow, that's some incredible numbers. 7 million bats estimated to date that have been lost by this. So the next question, why the concern? How are bats important in the ecosystem, and why are we concerned about this staggering loss?
Sure. And that's a question that we often get when you talk even about bats in general. Why should we be concerned about bats? What good are bats? Everyone knows that bats consume insects. That's probably the one thing that we relate with bats. From an economic standpoint, I think it's interesting, and I think it's something that's important for people to know is recently there was an article published in Science magazine, and the article was entitled "The Economic Importance of Bats and Agriculture." And this article explained that the loss of bats that we're seeing primarily due to white-nose, it could lead to agricultural losses estimated at more than $3.7 billion a year. Let's break down the economic impact a little further and focus on some single species. It's been estimated that a normal colony of big brown bats can consume almost 1.3 million insect pests per year. And a large majority of those insect pests are pests that predate on both corn and soybeans, which, as we all know, are the predominant crops, not only in Illinois, but throughout many of the Midwestern states. Breaking that down even further, little brown bats, which are very common throughout most of the Midwest, especially here in Illinois, it's been shown that a single little brown bat can consume 4 to 8 grams of insects each night during its active season. And if you extrapolate that, the loss of just 1 million bats results in the loss of between 660 and 1,300 metric tons of insects no longer being consumed each year by bats, strictly because they are suffering mortality from white-nose syndrome. That's just an incredible number. And the financial figures that go with that, scientists are estimating now that the value of bats to the agricultural industry, because of their ability to reduce insect pests, is about $23 billion per year. And that basically means that bats are helping the agricultural industry by reducing the number of pesticide applications that are needed to suppress insects, agricultural pests. Having to purchase less pesticides is obviously, more of a profit margin for farmers. So again, the loss of just 1 million bats to white nose, we're talking billions of dollars per year. And remember, thus far, we've lost almost 7 million bats. So, the economic numbers are just staggering.
Those are staggering numbers. So millions of bats. Obviously, the environmental and economic impacts, as you were talking about, are obviously of concern. So we know that scientists and natural resource agencies are doing their parts to try to help minimize the spread of this disease by limiting access to hibernacula, the caves and other areas where these bats overwinter. But for someone like myself or someone in the public, what could we be doing that could help with this?
Sure. There's kind of a trickle-down effect from what's being done at a national level to what's being done at a local level. Obviously, with the seriousness of white-nose syndrome, there is a national white-nose syndrome plan. And that is a plan that's been developed by the Fish and Wildlife Service in concert with other conservation partners. That plan consists of several working groups that are addressing different factors as far as, say, conservation, recovery, disease management, data management, those kind of things. As far as what just the general public can do, they're very simple things, but they really do contribute to bat conservation in the broader scale. Provide a home for bats by simply building and or installing a bat box, bat house in your backyard, in your neighborhood. Those are things that are, if you're not into building or whatever, you can purchase a bat house really at any home improvement store. Even stores like Walmart, bat boxes now are placed right next to birdhouses. Who would have thought 10, 20 years ago that we would see something like that? So it's just great. Other things, reduce just natural disturbance events to bats. Reduce outdoor lighting when you can, minimize tree clearing, protect streams, wetlands, watersheds, things like that. If bats are in your home, which, no one really enjoys, there are ways to humanely remove those animals, and state natural resource agencies, licensed nuisance wildlife control operators know how to safely remove those animals. And, that if and when you do find something like that, reach out to those agencies, because they can help guide how to safely and humanely remove those animals. So those are just some basics, but they really contribute in the long run to helping bats survive the overall white nose syndrome epidemic in North America.
All right, we've only had this a couple of decades, white nose syndrome here a couple of decades, and we've learned a lot in that short period of time. And that's because the researchers really jumped on this topic and were out there leading the cause, trying to understand what was going on and what could be done to minimize the impact. So what type of research activities have been taking place in Illinois or in the Midwest in general?
Illinois has actually been just a fantastic research partner in helping many different researchers from across the nation learn more about white nose. For example, the Department of Natural Resources has really partnered with other universities from across the nation, in universities like Virginia Tech, universities as far away as University of California, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, working with personnel from Michigan, working with personnel from Indiana. And a lot of these researchers are coming to Illinois, and we're focusing on a few sites where we have large numbers, or where in the past we have had very large numbers of bats hibernating. And unfortunately, many of these sites now, there's just been such a massive decline in the population of bats hibernating at these sites because of white nose. But with the bats that are remaining, we're helping to actually collect fungal spore samples from these animals, from the overall cave and mine environment, from the walls, from the floors, from the ceilings. And the fungus is then analyzed more in depth in a laboratory setting. And we're doing that, our researchers are doing that to essentially try and find a means to both actually possibly develop some sort of vaccine, some sort of treatment that can be applied, say, within a cave or mine, an external treatment that would then help to kill the fungus and treat the animals that are infected. So Illinois has been a great partner in inviting researchers really from across North America. And we feel very proud of what we've been able to do to contribute to helping find a cure for white nose. And the one thing that we have to remember, and it's very sad, is since 2006, we're now in 2021, there's no cure. There's no cure on the horizon. There really are no treatment options or methods on the horizon. We just continue to study the fungus, and we're hoping that, one of these days, sooner than later, that we will find something that will both treat the bats and also be environmentally friendly. As these bats are hibernating in caves, caves are a very sensitive, fragile ecosystem, and you can't just go into a cave and start spraying disinfectants or, say different types of medicine or whatnot. We have to be very conscious of the ecosystem too. So it's a challenge on all fronts. But we push forward. We're remaining optimistic, and the fight. We continue the fight.
Obviously, there's been so much hard work, and we hope that the researchers keep going with that, and certainly echo your hope that a cure is found soon. You've provided us with just such a wealth of information today. I'm not sure what else there is to cover, but are there any other last things that you would want our viewers to know about white nose syndrome or bats in general before we sign off?
I think it's important just to realize, kind of going back again on the importance of bats and the role that bats play in the ecosystem. With such a massive decline in the bat population, we have to remember that bats are the only mammal on the face of this earth that are capable of true flight. And there are over 1,200 species of bats on this planet. which means that nearly 20% of the Earth's total mammal or mammalian population is comprised of bats. 20% of the total mammalian population on this planet are bats. Most people don't know that. And when you read a figure like that, it's rather staggering. And again, when you just recognize the, not only the bats from a conservation perspective, but again, truly from an economic perspective, especially with the agriculture industry, white-nose syndrome truly deserves attention and focus, not only from the research community, but from the general public as well. So again, there are things that everyone can do. And we encourage even just the little things, again, like putting up a bat house, being cognizant of the environment around you, what you can do to protect your local environment is going to play a key, even a small part in helping bats to survive and hopefully helping the bat population to rebound from white nose once a cure is found.
Thanks, Joe. You've taught me an awful lot today.
Good.
Hopefully our viewers as well. Thanks for sitting down and talking with us about white nose syndrome and bats and what people can do, hopefully, to help them. For our viewers, if you have other questions about Illinois wildlife, or if you have suggestions for other Q&A sessions, we ask that you send those in to the Wildlife Illinois website. Until next time.